Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't denying someone a seat. It's deciding who deserves one. The boarding door was only minutes from closing when the calm rhythm of Flight 271 suddenly fractured beneath the bright white lights of Terminal B at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Passengers paused in the aisle. Flight attendants exchanged uncertain glances. A rolling suitcase tipped onto its side as every head slowly turned toward the front of the aircraft. Two airport security officers stood beside a woman seated quietly in first class, their expressions professional but unmistakably firm. Across the aisle, Daniel Whitmore, the airline's regional operations director, folded his arms with absolute confidence. His tailored navy suit looked flawless beneath the cabin lights, and the silver company badge on his lapel reflected like polished steel. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one officer said evenly. The woman looked up from the financial report resting on her tablet. Her face remained composed, almost surprisingly peaceful. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply blinked once before asking, "May I know why?" Daniel answered before either officer could speak. "Your boarding credentials have raised concerns, and we're not delaying this flight any longer." A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. Some passengers leaned into the aisle. Others quietly lifted their phones. A little boy sitting 3 rows back tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered something she couldn't quite answer. The woman sitting by the window slowly closed her tablet and rested it inside a worn leather briefcase that looked older than the luxury cabin surrounding her. She wore no designer labels. No expensive jewelry flashed beneath the lights. Her charcoal blazer was simple, neatly pressed, and paired with comfortable walking shoes instead of polished heels. To Daniel Whitmore, she looked completely out of place among the executives, celebrities, and frequent first-class travelers he believed he could identify with one glance. "This is first class," he said, his voice controlled enough to sound polite while carrying the unmistakable weight of judgment. "We'll sort everything out once you're off the aircraft." The woman nodded gently. "My name is Naomi Brooks," she replied. "My boarding pass was scanned at the gate without any issue." Daniel barely looked at the electronic scanner now resting in the gate agent's hand. He had already convinced himself that the system wasn't the problem. His assumptions were. "Please cooperate," he replied. Around them, the cabin grew quieter than any delayed flight should ever become. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than the silence settling over the rows. Naomi slowly stood, lifting her briefcase with one hand and smoothing the sleeve of her blazer with the other. There was no anger in her face, only disappointment so subtle that almost no one noticed it. One elderly passenger quietly murmured, "Something doesn't seem right." Another man lowered his newspaper and watched without blinking. A young flight attendant looked from Naomi to Daniel, clearly uncertain, but years of training had taught her not to challenge management in front of customers. As Naomi stepped into the aisle, one security officer offered a quiet, respectful gesture toward the exit. She accepted it without complaint. The phones recording the moment multiplied with every step she took. Daniel watched her leave with complete certainty that he had protected the airline from an embarrassing mistake. What he could not see was the unopened email waiting in Naomi's inbox, the one marked Final Investment Authorization, scheduled for a meeting less than 3 hours away, carrying a number so large that a single signature could reshape the future of the airline before midnight. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss as Naomi Brooks stepped into the terminal, carrying nothing but her weathered leather briefcase and the quiet dignity she had refused to surrender. The noise of rolling luggage, boarding announcements, and hurried conversations filled the concourse, yet somehow the world around her felt strangely distant. Behind the glass wall, the aircraft slowly backed away from the gate without her. She watched it for only a moment before lowering her eyes and checking the time. On her watch, 10:38 in the morning. Her meeting in New York was scheduled for 2 o'clock. She still had enough time to arrive if she found another flight. She did not call a lawyer. She did not post the videos already flooding social media. She simply walked toward a quiet corner of the terminal and sat beside a large window where sunlight spilled across the polished floor. She opened her laptop, not to complain about what had happened, but to review the final briefing for Horizon Equity Partners. 5 years earlier, almost nobody on Wall Street had heard of the firm. Investors dismissed it as another small minority-owned startup with unrealistic ambitions. Banks declined meetings before hearing the proposal. Venture capital firms smiled politely while searching for reasons to say no. Naomi remembered every closed door, every skeptical handshake, every room where people spoke to the men beside her instead of speaking directly to her. She also remembered something her mother had told her while pushing a cleaning cart through another airport many years before. Never let someone else's opinion decide how you carry yourself. They can only borrow your dignity if you hand it to them. Her mother had cleaned airport terminals for nearly 3 decades. Some travelers thanked her. Many never noticed her at all. As a little girl, Naomi often sat near the windows after school, reading library books while airplanes crossed the evening sky one after another. She loved watching departures because every flight reminded her that someone somewhere believed tomorrow could be different from today. That belief stayed with her long after the cleaning shifts ended. It followed her through college, through endless internships, through nights spent sleeping in small apartments with roommates while studying financial reports until sunrise. Opportunity had never arrived wrapped in comfort. It had always come disguised as hard work. A notification appeared on her laptop screen. The subject line read, "Final Board Review," followed by several encrypted attachments waiting for her approval before the afternoon meeting. Naomi quietly opened the files, her expression unchanged, despite everything that had happened less than 30 minutes earlier. Around her, travelers continued walking past without realizing the woman sitting alone near Gate 22 was responsible for guiding billions of dollars in investments across technology, healthcare, transportation, and infrastructure projects throughout the country. An elderly janitor slowly pushed a supply cart nearby, stopping briefly to collect a discarded coffee cup beneath one of the seats. Naomi stood immediately, picked up several forgotten newspapers scattered across the floor, and placed them neatly into the recycling bin before offering the man a warm smile. "Thank you for everything you do," she said sincerely. The janitor looked surprised before smiling back. "Not many people notice us anymore," he replied. Naomi nodded gently. "Someone noticed my mother every day," she answered softly. "That taught me never to overlook the people who keep the world moving." Neither of them realized that only a few yards away, another traveler had quietly recognized Naomi's face from a recent business magazine cover and was beginning to wonder why one of the most influential chief executive officers in America was sitting alone inside an airport terminal after missing a flight she should never have been asked to leave. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore walked through the executive corridor with the quiet satisfaction of someone convinced he had protected the airline from an expensive mistake. The polished marble floors reflected the morning sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and employees greeted him with respectful nods as he headed toward the operations center overlooking the runways. Giant digital screens displayed departures, arrivals, weather patterns, and aircraft positions across the country. Everything appeared perfectly under control. Daniel liked it that way. He believed airlines survived because people followed appearances as much as procedures. Years of management had taught him to trust quick judgments. Expensive watch, business traveler, designer luggage, elite customer, comfortable shoes, worn briefcase, quiet confidence. Potential problem. That unspoken formula had become part of his decision-making long ago, and until today it had never been seriously questioned. His assistant, Rebecca Collins, hurried toward him carrying a tablet. "The morning departure reports are ready," she said, matching his pace. Daniel accepted the device without slowing down. "Any complaints about the delay?" Rebecca hesitated for just a moment. "Only a few comments from passengers who recorded the incident." Daniel barely looked up. "That will disappear by tomorrow. Social media always finds something new." Rebecca nodded politely, although uncertainty lingered in her expression. She had noticed the woman from first class remained remarkably calm throughout the entire situation. No raised voice, no dramatic confrontation, just quiet cooperation. Something about that composure continued to bother her. Inside the operations center, several managers reviewed flight schedules while television monitors quietly played financial news in the background with the sound muted. Daniel poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and glanced toward the largest screen. Airline stocks were holding steady. Fuel prices had dropped slightly overnight. Investors appeared optimistic. It promised to be another successful quarter. One of the analysts looked up from his computer. "The Horizon Equity presentation is this afternoon, correct?" Daniel smiled confidently. Yes, $5 billion in potential investment. If everything goes well, expansion plans move ahead next year. Another executive added, I heard their chief executive officer keeps an incredibly low profile. Hardly anyone has actually met her. Daniel laughed softly. People with that kind of money usually enjoy being recognized. I doubt she is difficult to spot. Rebecca lowered her eyes without saying anything. The words lingered in the room longer than anyone expected. At that same moment, another notification appeared on her tablet. Passenger videos from the morning were spreading far faster than anticipated. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. She quietly opened one recording. The camera followed Naomi as she calmly walked through the aircraft aisle, carrying her old leather briefcase with steady hands while passengers whispered around her. Rebecca paused the video on a clear frame of Naomi's face. Something felt familiar. She enlarged the image. Then she opened another window and searched the latest issue of American Business Review, remembering an article she had read during a delayed flight only a few weeks earlier. The cover loaded onto her screen. Her breathing slowed. The same thoughtful eyes. The same composed expression. The same woman. Rebecca looked from the magazine cover back to the paused video, hoping she had made a mistake. Instead, the name beneath the photograph confirmed what her instincts had already begun to fear. Naomi Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, Horizon Equity Partners. The coffee cup slipped slightly in her trembling hand, and for the first time that morning, the operations center no longer felt comfortably quiet. It felt as though every screen, every clock, and every departing airplane had suddenly begun counting down toward a moment none of them were prepared to face. Rebecca felt the color drain from her face as she stared at the business magazine cover and then back at the paused video. There was no doubt anymore. The woman who had quietly walked off the airplane without raising her voice was the same executive who would be sitting across from their board later that afternoon to finalize the largest investment agreement in the airline's history. She swallowed hard and hurried toward Daniel Whitmore, who was discussing expansion plans with senior managers gathered around a glowing digital map of future routes. Daniel, she said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady, I think you need to see something. Without looking up, he accepted the tablet with mild impatience. Can it wait 5 minutes? Rebecca slowly shook her head. I really do not think it should. Daniel glanced at the screen, expecting another passenger complaint or another social media clip. Instead, he saw Naomi Brooks smiling confidently from the cover of American Business Review beneath the headline celebrating the country's most influential investment leaders. His eyes narrowed. He looked back at the paused airport video, then again at the magazine. For several long seconds, nobody in the room spoke. Finally, he let out a short laugh that sounded far less certain than before. There must be thousands of women who look similar, he said, handing the tablet back. Rebecca did not move. I checked the article, she answered quietly. She prefers commercial flights. She avoids private jets whenever possible. She is flying to New York today for the Horizon Equity board meeting. One by one, conversations around the operations center faded into silence. The financial analyst slowly turned away from his computer monitor. Another manager lowered his coffee cup without taking a sip. Even the constant keyboard clicking seemed to disappear beneath the weight of Rebecca's words. Daniel forced another smile, but this time it felt rehearsed. If she were really the chief executive officer, she would have said something. Rebecca looked directly into his eyes. Maybe she believed she should not have to. The sentence settled over the room like heavy winter air. Daniel replayed the recording. Naomi never demanded special treatment. She never mentioned her position. She never threatened legal action or asked employees whether they knew who she was. She simply asked why, listened to the explanation, and walked away with quiet grace. Suddenly, the confidence Daniel had carried all morning began slipping away. Another notification flashed across the operations center screens. Several national news outlets had started sharing the passenger videos. Comments multiplied by the second. Some viewers questioned the airline's procedures. Others wondered why the passenger remained so remarkably composed. Then another alert arrived. Horizon Equity Partners had officially confirmed its board meeting would begin on schedule at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon. The room grew even quieter. Daniel stared through the enormous windows overlooking the runway where aircraft lifted gracefully into the bright Carolina sky. Every departure had always represented opportunity to him. Today they looked different. Each airplane seemed to carry away another chance to correct a mistake that was rapidly growing beyond anyone's control. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered above Naomi Brooks's passenger profile for several silent moments before he finally looked at Rebecca and asked the question he never imagined needing to ask. Is there still another flight she could have taken to New York, or have we already lost the only chance to speak with her before that meeting begins? Rebecca checked the departure system with trembling fingers, her eyes moving rapidly across the list of outbound flights. There is one more flight to New York leaving in 45 minutes from Concourse D, she said. If she booked it immediately, she could still arrive before the board meeting. Daniel did not answer. He was already walking quickly through the operations center, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor with a rhythm far less confident than before. Employees stepped aside as he passed, sensing that something had shifted. The certainty that had surrounded him only an hour earlier had quietly dissolved into growing unease. Down in the terminal, Naomi Brooks remained seated near the wide glass windows where sunlight reflected across the runway like sheets of silver. Her laptop rested open beside a cup of untouched coffee. Several encrypted reports filled the screen as she reviewed transportation forecasts, infrastructure projections, and shareholder recommendations with the same calm concentration she had shown inside the aircraft. Her phone vibrated softly. The caller identification displayed the name of her executive assistant, Michael Harris. Naomi answered with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Michael." His voice carried obvious concern. "The board has seen the videos." Naomi remained silent for a moment before quietly asking, "Has everyone arrived?" "Almost everyone," Michael replied. "Several members want to postpone the meeting until tomorrow." Naomi slowly looked through the window as another aircraft lifted into the clear blue sky. "No," she answered. "We keep the schedule exactly as planned." Michael hesitated. "Should I prepare a statement for the press?" Naomi gently closed her eyes for a brief second. "Not yet. I would rather people understand what happened before they hear what I think about it." Across the terminal, the elderly janitor she had helped earlier watched the growing crowd gathering around nearby television screens. National news channels had begun replaying passenger recordings from the morning, asking questions about airline procedures and customer treatment. Travelers stopped walking long enough to recognize the woman quietly working on her laptop only a short distance away, although very few realized she was the same person appearing on business magazines displayed inside airport bookstores across the country. Meanwhile, Daniel reached the customer service desk near Gate 22. "Where is Ms. Brooks?" he asked, trying to keep his breathing steady. The gate supervisor looked surprised. "She left about 15 minutes ago, sir. I believe she was heading toward another terminal." Daniel immediately turned toward the large departure board. Hundreds of names and destinations glowed beneath the bright ceiling lights. Somewhere beyond those endless corridors, the woman he had dismissed without hesitation was preparing for one of the most important financial meetings of the year. Rebecca caught up beside him, slightly out of breath. "Corporate headquarters just called," she whispered. "They know who she is now." Daniel stared ahead without speaking. His phone rang again. This time the caller identification displayed the office of the airline's chief executive officer. He answered immediately. The voice on the other end remained calm, but every word felt heavier than the last. "Daniel," the chief executive officer said quietly, "I want one honest answer before this becomes a national headline. Did anyone verify the facts before asking Ms. Brooks to leave the aircraft? Or did everyone simply trust assumptions?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Around him, travelers continued walking toward their gates, completely unaware that a single unanswered question had become far more dangerous than every video spreading across the internet. At that exact moment, only 2 terminals away, Naomi picked up her briefcase, glanced once at the boarding display for her new flight, and began walking toward a departure that could change far more than her own destination. The departure lounge at Concourse D felt strangely peaceful compared to the storm unfolding everywhere else. Warm afternoon sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, painting long golden reflections across the polished floor, while aircraft drifted silently beyond the runway like silver birds disappearing into an endless blue horizon. Naomi Brooks found a quiet seat near the window, placed her weathered leather briefcase beside her, and folded her hands for a moment without opening her laptop. Around her, families laughed over sandwiches, business travelers answered emails, and children pressed their hands against the glass each time another airplane pushed back from the gate. Life continued exactly as it always had. Only Naomi knew how different this afternoon had quietly become. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was the chairman of Horizon Equity Partners. "Naomi," Charles Bennett said gently, "every member of the board has now watched the airport video." She listened without interrupting. "Several directors are furious," he continued. "Some believe we should immediately cancel today's meeting and release a public statement." Naomi lowered her eyes toward the sunlight reflecting across the floor before answering. "Anger makes fast decisions. Responsibility requires slower ones." Charles remained silent. He had worked beside Naomi for nearly 12 years, yet her ability to remain calm during moments that unsettled everyone else still amazed him. "Do you still want to discuss the airline proposal?" he finally asked. Naomi watched an airport employee kneel beside an elderly traveler whose suitcase had unexpectedly come open, helping gather neatly folded clothes without drawing attention from anyone nearby. The simple act brought a quiet smile to her face. "We will discuss every proposal," she replied. "But we will also discuss character. Numbers tell us how companies perform. Moments like today tell us who they really are." After the call ended, Naomi reached into her briefcase and removed a small leather notebook that had traveled with her for years. Tucked inside its first page was a faded photograph of her mother standing beside an airport cleaning cart, still wearing the same warm smile she carried through countless overnight shifts. Naomi gently traced the edge of the picture with her thumb. She could almost hear her mother's familiar voice. "Never become the kind of successful person who forgets how ordinary people are treated. Success does not reveal character. It tests it." Naomi quietly closed the notebook as another boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. A young airport employee approached her holding a fresh bottle of water. "Ma'am," he said nervously, "someone at the coffee shop recognized you and asked me to bring this over. They said thank you for helping the janitor earlier." Naomi accepted the bottle with genuine gratitude. "Please thank them for their kindness," she replied. The young employee smiled before walking away, leaving Naomi once again surrounded by peaceful silence. Hundreds of miles away, stock market analysts continued discussing the $5 billion investment that could reshape the airline's future. Inside corporate headquarters, executives reviewed crisis reports while legal teams prepared for questions that had not existed that morning. Yet none of them knew what decision Naomi would ultimately make because none of them had asked the one question she considered most important. Not whether a mistake had been made, but whether anyone was willing to learn from it. As boarding for her new flight quietly began, Naomi stood, lifted her briefcase, and took one final look across the runway where sunlight shimmered against rows of waiting aircraft. At that same moment, Daniel Whitmore entered his car with corporate headquarters on speakerphone, racing toward the airport's opposite terminal after learning that Naomi's replacement flight had not departed yet, unaware that he now had only a few remaining minutes to face the woman he had judged long before he had ever taken the time to truly see her. The boarding announcement echoed gently through Concourse D as passengers began forming an orderly line, their rolling suitcases clicking softly across the polished floor. Naomi Brooks stepped forward with her boarding pass in one hand and her leather briefcase in the other, her pace steady and unhurried. Just as she reached the boarding lane, a familiar voice called her name from across the terminal. "Ms. Brooks." Heads turned instinctively. Daniel Whitmore hurried through the crowd, his tie slightly loosened, his polished shoes no longer matching the composed executive everyone had seen only hours earlier. Rebecca Collins followed several steps behind, breathing heavily after nearly running the length of the concourse. Naomi stopped and slowly turned toward them. The bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the enormous windows illuminated the quiet expression on her face. She neither frowned nor smiled. She simply waited. Daniel slowed as he approached, suddenly realizing how different this moment felt from the one inside the aircraft. Earlier he had spoken with complete authority. Now every carefully prepared sentence seemed to disappear before reaching his lips. Around them, travelers recognized both faces from the videos circulating online and quietly stepped aside, creating an unexpected circle of silence without anyone asking them to. Daniel finally spoke. Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology. Naomi listened without interrupting. We made a serious mistake this morning, he continued. I made a serious mistake. The words sounded honest, but they also carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had only recently understood the consequences of his own decisions. Naomi looked at him for a long moment before quietly asking, "What mistake are you apologizing for?" Daniel blinked. He had expected anger, perhaps even a refusal to speak with him. He had not expected a question so simple that it demanded complete honesty. He lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering. I judged you before I knew anything about you. Naomi remained silent. The terminal seemed almost perfectly still. Even the nearby boarding scanner paused while passengers respectfully waited. Daniel took a slow breath. I believed appearances told me everything I needed to know. I never stopped to verify the facts. I never treated you with the respect every passenger deserves. Naomi nodded gently. Thank you for saying that. Daniel looked up, surprised by the calmness in her voice. Corporate headquarters knows about the incident, he said. Our chief executive officer knows. Our board knows. Everyone knows. Naomi glanced through the windows toward the aircraft waiting at the gate. That is unfortunate, she replied quietly. Not because they found out about me. Because they found out through a mistake instead of through your values. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Those words struck harder than any public criticism ever could. Naomi continued, her voice remaining soft enough that everyone nearby leaned in to hear. This morning, I never wanted special treatment. I only wanted the same fair process every traveler should receive. If someone cannot receive respect before their job title is known, then the problem is much larger than one employee or one flight. Daniel felt every sentence settle deeply into the silence surrounding them. For the first time in years, he understood that leadership was not measured by how confidently someone made decisions, but by how carefully they questioned their own assumptions before making them. A boarding agent quietly announced final boarding for the flight to New York. Naomi offered Daniel a small, gracious smile, adjusted the strap of her briefcase, and stepped toward the gate. Daniel watched her hand the boarding pass to the agent, who greeted her warmly and welcomed her aboard with sincere respect. As Naomi disappeared down the jet bridge, Daniel's phone vibrated once again. The message came directly from corporate headquarters. Emergency board meeting. Effective immediately. Horizon Equity Partners has reached its investment decision. The cabin door closed with a soft click, sealing away the noise of the terminal as Naomi Brooks settled into her window seat. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the runway, bathing the aircraft in warm amber light. She rested her leather briefcase on the empty seat beside her and quietly opened the final folder prepared for the Horizon Equity board meeting. Across the aisle, another passenger recognized her from the airport videos but respectfully looked away after offering a small nod. Naomi returned the gesture with a grateful smile before focusing once again on the documents in front of her. Thousands of feet away in the airline's headquarters, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Executives gathered around a polished conference table while multiple television screens replayed the same recordings from that morning. No one discussed quarterly profits anymore. No one mentioned expansion plans. The only topic left in the room was trust. The airline's chief executive officer slowly removed his glasses and looked toward Daniel Whitmore, who remained standing near the far end of the room after joining through a secure video connection from the airport. Tell us everything, the chief executive officer said calmly. Daniel did not attempt to defend himself. He described every decision exactly as it had happened, including the assumptions he had made before verifying the passengers' information. When he finished speaking, silence settled over the boardroom. It was the kind of silence that appears only when every person realizes the true cost of a single poor decision. Finally, one board member quietly asked, "Did Ms. Brooks ever ask for special treatment?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "No." Another director leaned forward. "Did she threaten legal action?" Again, Daniel answered, "No." A third executive folded his hands together. "Did she tell anyone she was the chief executive officer of Horizon Equity Partners?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "No. She simply expected to be treated like every other passenger." Those words echoed across the room more powerfully than any presentation ever could. At almost the same moment, the Horizon Equity Board meeting officially began inside a Manhattan conference room overlooking the Hudson River. Massive windows reflected the golden colors of the afternoon, while directors reviewed the final investment proposal displayed across a large digital screen. $5 billion. A partnership capable of reshaping the airline's future for decades. Charles Bennett looked toward Naomi at the head of the table. The recommendation committee has completed its review, he said quietly. Before we vote, is there anything you wish to add? Naomi looked around the room before gently closing the proposal folder. Yes, she replied. Financial strength matters. Operational performance matters. But culture matters just as much. We invest in people before we invest in numbers, because people create the numbers. Several directors nodded thoughtfully. Naomi continued, her voice calm and measured. This morning exposed a weakness that cannot be measured on a balance sheet. Policies can be rewritten. Procedures can be improved. Character requires a deeper commitment. She paused briefly before sliding the contract toward the center of the table. I do not believe today's events should become an excuse for revenge. However, I also do not believe they should become an opportunity to ignore a lesson that has been placed directly in front of us. The directors exchanged thoughtful glances as the chairman slowly reached for the voting device resting beside his notes. Hundreds of miles away, Daniel sat alone in a quiet airport office staring at his silent phone, unaware that the decision about the airline's future was no longer being measured only in dollars, but in whether one woman's extraordinary grace would be enough to outweigh one organization's failure to live up to the values it claimed to represent. The conference room remained completely silent as each director cast a vote. One by one, the results appeared on the large screen until the final decision filled the room. The proposed $5 billion investment would not move forward under its current conditions. Instead, Horizon Equity Partners unanimously approved a formal invitation for the airline to return in 6 months with documented reforms focused on employee training, customer treatment, and accountability. No applause followed. No one celebrated. Naomi Brooks simply closed her folder and nodded once. If they become the company they say they want to be, she said quietly, they will deserve another opportunity. Several board members looked at her with admiration. She had every reason to walk away forever, yet she had chosen responsibility over revenge. Hundreds of miles away, Daniel Whitmore sat alone in the airport conference room when the official letter arrived from corporate headquarters. He read every line slowly. His shoulders relaxed with unexpected relief when he reached the final paragraph. The investment had not disappeared forever. It had been postponed until the airline proved its values matched its promises. Daniel lowered the letter onto the table and stared through the window toward the runway. For the first time in his career, he understood that leadership was not about protecting a company's image. It was about protecting every person's dignity before anyone knew their title, their income, or the size of their influence. Over the following months, the airline introduced new customer service standards, expanded employee training, and required every manager to complete programs centered on fairness, respectful communication, and unbiased decision-making. Daniel volunteered to teach the very first leadership session himself. At the beginning of every class, he told a story about a traveler who carried an old leather briefcase instead of expensive luggage and who never once demanded special treatment. He never mentioned the amount of money involved. He never described the headlines. He only reminded new managers that the most important decision they would make each day often happened before they spoke their first word. 6 months later, Naomi returned to the same airport. The terminal looked almost unchanged. The polished floors still reflected the morning light. Families still hurried toward their gates. Children still waved excitedly at departing airplanes. Yet something felt different. A young gate agent greeted every passenger with the same warm smile, taking time to answer questions without rushing anyone aside. Nearby, the elderly janitor Naomi had helped months before recognized her immediately. His face brightened as he walked over. Looks like things have changed around here, he said with a gentle laugh. Naomi looked across the terminal as employees patiently assisted an elderly couple with their luggage while another worker knelt beside a frightened child to help reunite her with her parents. She smiled softly. Yes, she replied. It looks like they have. As boarding began, Daniel approached quietly. He was no longer wearing the confident expression of someone certain he knew everything. Instead, He carried the calm humility of someone who had learned something worth keeping for the rest of his life. "Welcome back, Ms. Brooks," he said sincerely. "Thank you for giving us another chance to become better." Naomi nodded, accepted her boarding pass, and stepped onto the jet bridge. This time no one looked at her because they knew she was a chief executive officer. They looked at her exactly as every traveler deserved to be seen, with simple human respect. Outside the window, another aircraft lifted into the clear morning sky, its wings catching the first golden light of a new day. While inside the terminal, the quiet victory belonged not to wealth, not to power, but to the simple truth that kindness and fairness should never depend on who people think you are.